Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Morning Update Show. I'm your co host, Trey Holiday, and you guys have been rocking with us on our digital week. We appreciate you so much. I'm going to digitally throw it over to my guy, Big O. I got that right finally. I understand to point this way. What's up, Big O? Happy Friday, brother.
Happy Friday. How are you, Treyana?
I'm good. I'm good. Doing well, man. It's Friday, man. I'm happy. Family's in town from North Carolina. So I'm about to enjoy myself this weekend, man. It's time for some family time. So I'm excited.
Good for you. It's supposed to be Feel Good Friday, my friend, but I'll be honest with you. It's been a long night here over in the Converge Studios offices. You know, our colleague Bobby Stills was arrested last night on Capitol Hill. He was picked up at actually was caught on live stream. It was kind of distressing because we weren't there last night. It was like the first time in a long time that any of us have been out by themselves,
Oh, man.
and so I actually saw Bobby, get arrested in real time on the live stream. They grabbed him saying failure to disperse and for for obstruction of justice. They took him downtown and he PR'd out, which means his personal recognizance. They got out on his name with a guarantee that he's going to appear in court. So that's what they call it as a PR. So he got PR'd out. And he got out of jail earlier this morning, a few hours ago. And right now, we're still looking into a lot of the details that are out there. So anybody who's live streaming and things like that, make sure hit me up directly. Email me omari@whereweconverge.com. Looking for people who have footage and things like that. But the best thing is he's out of the King County Jail. He's resting, and he's told us a lot of stuff as far as the interaction there, but you never know how these cases or these situations go. We hear that a lot of charges get dropped, but you just never know. So don't want to say too much here on the show. Want him to be able to seek legal advice if he needs to, and everything else. But yeah, it was a long night over here.
Man, I'm just glad Bobby's all right, man. Everybody knows the postman, Bobby Stills, man. He's be on the ground all the time, always capturing footage and capturing stories. So I really hope that there's nothing that's going to stand with any of these charges, that they realize he was a journalist out there and that, there's nothing happening with his record or anything like that. But I understand where you're coming from. Oh, we do know how these things tend to play out. So it's great that you're keeping it close to the chest.
Yeah, well, this is Seattle protests has revealed a lot,
Yeah.
And yeah, we're one of the few journalists that are out there. None of the big cities. If you guys ever wonder why you never see things on 4, 5, 7, 11, 13, unless it's third party footage or whatever, is because their companies won't let them come out there. You know what I'm saying? Not even that they might not necessarily want to be there, but their companies won't let them go out there. Converge is one of the few media companies that's actually out there, and been out there really since day one. I want to pop in here. Also, so on today's show, so we got Mayor Durkan here probably in a few minutes. We're waiting for the mayor to come on, and it's timing is crazy because yesterday I was pushing the mayor's office, like, I got some questions from the Black community about this $100 million. You know what I'm saying? And you heard us here yesterday. I'm like, man, what's up? I'm sending email over to the mayor. Let's talk about this $100 million. Well, the mayor got back to us, late last night. And then, Bobby Stills gets arrested. So it'll be an interesting conversation here with the mayor in a second. Let's go out. But we got Eric Calligraphy. He's over at Jimi Hendrix Park. I don't know how long we'll be able to carry this. There's a press conference that's going on over there. Another lawsuit getting announced. Hold on one second. We got an audio on it. Which is located on land that had belonged to Native peoples. This is Jimi Hendrix Park right now. That's Eric Calligraphy who's out there. Sound looks like it's a little bit low, but there's a press conference that's going on. It's a big announcement actually, and we'll talk about this more on the other side of the interview with the mayor. But I wanted to talk to you. We'll come back here to Eric. Looks like they're doing some formalities and introductions right now. So Mayor Durkan coming on here, talk about the conversation about this $100 million per year for, supposedly for the next 10 years. And so, we called her out saying, explain something. So she'll be here to explain, but this is actually back in June. I want to play this clip for our audience right now.
That starts with promising and delivering to community more investments. And I'm talking on the scale of, I think we need to invest at least $100 million a year for the next 10 years that goes back into community to invest in those institutions that we have underfunded for generations.
All right. That was June 12th. And, that was back when the Chavs was around, which seems like probably a year ago at this point.
Yeah.
But the mayor said that she was putting up $100 million. We had a lot of questions then about this $100 million as to where it's going to come from, where it's going to go, who's accountable for it, who has say over and everything else. So hopefully she'll be prepared to discuss that here today, as well as some other questions. Clearly, at this point, I really wanted to try to keep things like budget aligned and everything else. And also I want to ask her about, the free the funds, that's the other thing now that's out of this demand side, and King County Equity Now and all of these other things as well. So, and actually I got a clip here, and this is one that we'll play for the mayor when the mayor gets on. This is Sean Glaze talking about basically free the funds.
I mean, I think one thing that's really important for people to recognize is that it is now up to the mayor to release those funds. So City Council has spoken very clearly and articulated that this is what needs to happen. This money needs to go out to community. It needs to happen now in 2020. And it's up to the mayor to actually move and act to get those funds into community hands. And so if that money doesn't go into community hands, it is because our mayor has chosen not to act swiftly enough to get them there.
Now, you're over at King County Equity Now, Trayana. What are your thoughts on this? I think we have a few minutes before Mayor Durkan comes online.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that one of the things that King County Equity Now represents, and you've heard me say this many times, is really this coalition style moving forward. We no longer, I think the community no longer wants to, think that the only way to get things done in community is with, these kind of smaller groups or, mayor appointed people coming into community and them doing their own collaboration. But it always feels like the community is left out of that. And so what King County Equity Now represents is a coalition style. Things need to be done with transparency. They need to be done out in the open so that the public can participate. That's what participatory budgeting is all about. And I think as we start to see this 17 million with the participatory budget that the mayor needs to do with the free the funds movement now, like what is she going to do and how is she going to do that? But also with this $1 billion investment into communities, and really understanding that originally there was some concern because originally it was like it was going to go to Black communities. Now it's like BIPOC communities. And ultimately, I think that the community at large really wants to understand how they're doing this and what the approach is going to be that they take. And I think it's important that whatever approach they really decide to take, that it's full of transparency, because that's one of the things that the community is definitely pressing and demanding for at this point.
Right. So, I mean, what I hear you saying is what's important for you is what clearly, transparency, to who are decision makers, 3, where the money's going, things like that, right?
Yeah. And doing it in a collaborative style versus, kind of like, well, we have our people that we go to, or we have our, our groups that we talk to that are plugged into these communities. We're going to go that route. That is really something that's innovative and different, that takes on a real collaborative style. That's what I think. That's what I would like to see personally.
Right. So, I mean, are you feeling, has King County Equity Now, as far as of, had any discussions with Mayor Durkan about this $100 million?
Yeah, I mean, there's been some discussion. I think a lot of it was really about the participatory budget, but a lot of that discussion really resonates here with this $100 million. I mean, any kind of money, any funds that are coming out of the city government, really it needs to be a collaborative process. And that's really where King County Equity Now has stood. And that's kind of where we are standing is, collaboration and transparency.
Right. But after collaboration, after transparency, hopefully you get that and this money is dispersed. where's King County Equity now at about accountability and return on investment? Because basically this is an investment we're talking about into community, and this is the taxpayers' investment into the community. So where's your stand as far as the accountability once these funds are dispersed?
I think that's super important, though, and that's why a collaborative process is so important in the beginning, because having everybody in the room helps to identify how that looks like. What is it? What are the specific deliverables, and how are they accounted for? Right? How is the money spent being accounted for? That's going to be important. And when you have the right folks in the room, you can actually map out what that looks like. Because I know the community. Not only when I talk about transparency, it's not just about the people you're talking to, the groups you're working with. It's also about where those funds go, where they land, right? And whose pockets are getting pocketed, right? What does this actually look like as it plays out? I think that's super important for the people to understand and know. And that's definitely something that's important for me in terms of accountability. And as we've seen in the Black community, sometimes when these major funds happen, a lot of the times they go to certain people and they get misappropriated. So we don't want that. Once again, we want to really right the wrongs of, past history, that we can really do something that's innovative and new, but also that really helps out with a lot of those gaps that we've seen in the past. So I think accountability is going to be key. And I think really having the right people in the room to determine and map out what that looks like is going to be key in the beginning of the process.
I think, you're saying right people in the room. Other people might take that as seat at the table. Or are you saying that, there's some apprehension that the right people, as you see them, won't be involved in this process or have that seat at the table?
I think that historically speaking, that has been the case, that it's been that there are maybe a handful of folks picked out of the community that are apparently supposed to represent the community, and they don't always represent the community at the best interest. What we've seen, particularly in the Black community in Seattle, is a misappropriation of funds. And when you do that, when you think, this group of 10 people are the ones that I should speak to regarding the Black community and how these funds are going to get released into the Black community. We gave this amount of millions to this group and this amount of millions to that group. But what we've seen happen in the past is that then those groups misappropriate funds, or they do backdoor dealings to get their friends the contracts and things like that. And we don't want that.
Well, is it a sense that as a Black community, we're still just fighting over crumbs?
Absolutely. That's definitely one of the things. And that's why this $1 billion, really being invested in, when you talk about communities of opportunity, it gets really ambiguous when we know that statistically speaking, it is Black people in this country that have really suffered. It is Native people in this country that have suffered. It is brown people. When we talk about Hispanics, when we talk about Latinos, when we talk about Mexicans, there's very specific sets of people that have really been left out of all of the wealth. And so that's where we need to really concentrate the investment.
All right. Thank you. Hey, we're going to take a short break right now. I see that Mayor Durkan is online, talked about Bobby Stills. And I just thought that he actually had filmed a thank you clip a few weeks ago. I think this would be appropriate to go to break with my man, Bobby Stills. When we come back, we have Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan.
Appreciate everybody that follows us, donates to us, supports us. We have a staff here that works really, really, really hard. A lot of volunteers that come through, and we're trying to make some really, really good stuff for you guys. And we're a growing company, and please, even a handshake coming up in public is worth something to me. We get a lot of love from you guys, and I just want to reciprocate that love to you guys and say I appreciate it. It really fills my heart with joy when people come up and recognize me for some of the work that I've done, and it makes me really proud. And I get a lot of my friends and family tell me about how proud they are, and that's the thing about it is we've been working hard at doing this for a long time, and we want to be able to bring other people into our family that are to continue to do good stuff. And so, all the help we get from the public, we appreciate and keep watching. And we hope to make you guys proud, and I'm open to any suggestions for some stuff you guys like to see. I'm here.
All right, welcome back to the Morning Update Show. So Mari Salisbury.
Trey Holiday.
There you go.
Happy Friday.
Yeah, man, I'm telling you, it's been a stressful Friday thus far. But you know what? We're gonna turn a frown into a smile, hopefully. Let's see. We're bringing here Mayor Durkan. Mayor Durkan, good morning. How are you?
I'm all right, Omari. How are you? I'm sorry to hear the news this morning, just like you were.
Yeah, well, man, I appreciate that, Mayor. And hopefully, I know we talked about. I put a call out or called you out yesterday to want to talk about this 100 million, and I appreciate you accepting that call. And I hope that we'll have some time today for a question or two about these protests that are going on in the streets of Seattle.
Yep, thanks very much, and it's great to be here, Triana. You guys are doing amazing work. So it is. I just want to say to you and Bobby, journalism is more important than ever, and I think street journalism has shown how critical it is during this period of time. And since the murder of George Floyd ignited the civil rights reckoning, it really has been you and Bobby and other folks who are in the streets who bring what's happening there. Early on in the protests, it was actually me watching one of your videos, the famous pink umbrella video, that because you were there and I saw it, I was able the next day to talk to the OPA and OIG and say, we got to look at this and you've got to examine what we're doing because we got to do better. So there's direct impact from your reporting to change that's happening in City Hall. It may not be quick enough, but I want to thank you and thank Bobby for your work.
Thank you, Mayor Durkan. I appreciate it. And yeah, I definitely have some questions for you, but we'll go right into what our original discussion was here. And this is about this $100 million a year times 10 years, talks about $1 billion over 10 years. I want to play this clip for you, Mayor Durkan. This is back on June 12th.
That starts with promising and delivering to community more investments. And I'm talking on the scale of, I think we need to invest at least $100 million a year for the next 10 years that goes back into community to invest in those institutions that we have underfunded for generations.
All right, Mayor Durkan, you put it out there, June 12th, you threw it out there, $100 million a year times 10 years, $1 billion. Man, what's the story? What's going on? Where are we at? I know the budget's coming out next week.
Yeah, the story is, and I even said it the weeks before that, and you'll see my budget next week, that we're going to start this process. It is really difficult times in the city of Seattle budget-wise, but we as a city and a nation have underinvested in the Black community, communities of color, Indigenous communities for generations. And we know what makes healthy, thriving communities. And it is time that we make true on our word. And so my budget will have $100 million that is allocated to a community investment fund. We're going to kick off a community task force that's going to have representatives from throughout the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, but they will the ones that will engage with community and determine how that money should be prioritized, what kinds of investments, about building community wealth, which you were talking about before. Is it healthcare? Is it economic justice? Is it educational justice? There's areas that we know that we have to really address. If you look at every one of the health determinants and the economic determinants for communities of color, we have fallen behind. And even today's newspaper talked about here in Seattle, the median income for whites in Seattle is over $100,000 a year. But for Black families, it's about $43,000 a year. We have got to change that. Kids growing up in South Park should not have a lower life expectancy than kids growing up in Laurelhurst. So this will be the beginning of a process. I want to find a way to make sure we have this level of investment over 10 years. And the other thing I want to say is, Omari, is I've worked really hard to fence off the usual tricks where government says, hey, here's a pot of money, but they just take it away from investments they're already making. We're not doing that.
Exactly. So, all right, a few things, right? I know our time is limited, so I'm gonna just come with some rapid fire out here. Is first of all, you say the city is it definitely is. It's in a budget shortfall, hundreds of millions of dollars. Where are you gonna get this $100 million from?
There's different pots, but we have a thing called the general fund. This $100 million is coming from our general fund. It will be dedicated to these investments, and community is going to begin the process to determine how they want to prioritize it, how they want to put it out the door. Do they want it in participatory budgeting? Do they want it in grant making, RFPs? But the first phase is to really focus on, if you have a 10-year threshold, what outcomes do you want for your communities? And let community decide that. And we have, We've done some things right in the city. You've talked about it here today. If you look at our Equitable Development Initiative, some of the programs we've gotten through Africa Town, Ethiopian Community Center, Filipino Community Center. If you look at our Families in Ed Levy, our preschool and childcare, and free tuition for college, we are doing some things right. $1.5 billion in affordable housing I've announced since being mayor, but we have to have systemic investments by community, decided by community, in community, to move forward.
So, ma'am, let me just jump in right here, because I'll be honest with you, as Black people from the community, we hear community, and Triana was just talking about that. We hear community is just like, man, it's vague, and a lot of times politicians and other people who are in the community use the word community, and it's supposed to be like, we understand, and kumbaya or something. Like, man, can you be more specific of who you mean by community? Because it's just kind of a vague catchphrase now these days.
So I think you're exactly right, Omari, and we'll be announcing the task force next week. We're talking to folks. It will be all people from the BIPOC community, from various organizations and individuals who have deep ties to the community and who will themselves then engage a broader community. Because I agree with you, people use community in a lot of ways. No community is monolithic. The Black community isn't monolithic. The Asian community isn't monolithic. Our BIPOC communities aren't. And we've got to engage a range of voices. But I believe that for too long, City Hall has been the only gatekeeper to that, and have had limited engagements. And we try to center the voice of community. But really, if we turn to community, you look at some of the programs we have, they were developed, they were thought of, and they were grown in community. Free college, that was an idea that came from community. Free transit came from the kids at Rainier Beach. If you look at some of the programs, Rainier Beach, beautiful place for youth. We know what works, and I think community has to then look at, how do we want to scale these investments over time?
All right. So another question here, or just something that happens, is one thing is barrier to entry. In our community, we call it the chicken dinner. And we see the chicken dinner all the time, like especially the Black contractors can tell you about the chicken dinner. And what that is you get all those developers who are gentrifying the Central District, and they invite all the Black contractors in to a chicken dinner, and they say, hey man, we really want you guys to work on our building and this and that and everything else. And at the end of the day, it's disingenuous. You have a mom and pop contractor company, and then all of a sudden they got to fill out 500 pages document in order to get on the job and everything else. And it's a systemic trap that's built to keep access away from Black people. And so now you've talked about this fine, this $100 million in community and task force and everything else. Man, how low or high are the barriers of entry? How committed are you personally in your office to making sure that this just isn't another chicken dinner trap?
I'm very committed, and I want to really emphasize this investment will not stand alone. We have to continue to make the investments we are, but we also have to lower those barriers in all our city programs, regardless of how community decides to prioritize their investments. For example, when we rebuild the West Seattle Bridge, I've talked to Sam Zimbabwe to say, we have to start now to identify not just Black contractors, to make sure that that work is Black people, and that we really are expanding that. I've talked to Ollie Garrett about how do we do better for WIMBYs. And it's everything from how do you have a way to fill out the forms, to how do they get loans, to how do they have credit, how do they pay their employees, to the training. And so we have to be looking across all systems and all dollars that the city is spending to see how we do better in all our programs. All of this has got to work together. We have direct assistance that we do through rental assistance and grocery vouchers and direct aid. We have programs where we give community-based organizations the funding, but the ecosystem is not enough. And nobody can look across what's happened in Seattle for generations and say honestly that we have done it well, or that we haven't had systemic racism holding back communities of color for generations here in Seattle.
Ma'am, so I just want to clarify something here, because this has really been a big issue leading up to this announcement. I guess you'll make the full announcement here in a few days. So my understanding is, at least how I heard from you, it's not your office directly allocating, say, X number of millions to this community group or X number of millions to that community group. What you're saying is that you're basically putting the money in a pot, and then task force is going to work through that and then come up with a system of where the money should go and then how it's going to be accessed by community. Basically, I'm trying to say, or is the money going from Mayor Durkan to specific community groups, or is it going, Mayor Durkan to, or the city, of course, to this bucket, to this task force, and then onward to the streets?
So it's going to, the bucket's going to be for the task force through the engagement of the collective voice of community to prioritize it. Once they prioritize it, then we will provide all the assistance. They may need research, additional support from community to look at what the programs themselves are to do it, but they will not, the mayor's office is not going to be controlling this. We will, because it is public money, there's going to have to be oversight and outcomes and accountability, but this really is going to be driven by community. I've been talking to mayors across the country. There's no city that has done this on this scale. Parts of it will work, parts of it won't, but that's happened in the white community for generations. This is the city of 1,000 pilots. And so I think we've got to be willing to say and to empower community to make those decisions. And it'll be in phases. The task force itself also at the beginning it's not going to be Hunger Games like some other things where they're picking one contractor over another and everybody's pitting. It first is, where do we need the investments and what do we imagine our community to look like in 10 years if we are able to invest at this sustained level for that period of time and not cut back on the other programs. I have to emphasize it was really hard in this budget process to tell people, nope, that is not coming out of the 100 million. We are still going to do the things that we're doing. This is really a new process, for Seattle to say, community, let's have a process by which there's community direction and empowerment and the collective voice of community, because community knows. I mean, people that live in South Seattle or Lake City Way or South Park, they know right now today what works. And that's what we have to empower.
Right.
Well, I have a question about the community because June 7th, there was a statement that came out from you saying, I'm going to do this investment specifically in the Black community. And then later it was changed to BIPOC. And I want to understand the difference between the two or what caused that shift, because we have understood that statistically, the numbers have shown that it's really Black families that are at the bottom of the scale. Really, it's like Black and Native families. I just want to hear from you what the change was there, because there was a direct statement saying investment into Black communities, and now it's really about this kind of BIPOC communities. And historically, we know that Black, struggles, a lot of times they get co-opted. So I'm just wondering from you, what was the change and the shift there?
So I think there's been, from a number of communities, the sense of a range of people left behind. And if you look at, for example, in the pandemic, who has suffered most the health and economic consequences, it is the Black community and the Latinx community. And you look at the social outcomes and the graph that you're showing right now, the income by race. So I am interested in talking to people. It could be that the task force says, because of what you're saying, we are going to invest in the Black community and outcomes disproportionately. And we think that that's where we need to get the metrics, because we've looked at the facts, and we look at the fact when I was growing up here, and Omari knows this better than I, 75% of the Central District was owned and lived in by Black people. Today, it's less than 14%. That kind of gentrification has not occurred in any other demographic. And the impacts of that, you look at what's happening in North King County and South King County, people are tied together. So we are going to really focus on how do we, this is in conjunction with cultural spaces. We announced this week, we sent down that Bird Bar Place now is owned by the community. The Senior Center is, we introduced that legislation together with Fire Station 6. We also have to look for those properties we can reclaim for community. So I agree with you completely that the Black community itself has got to be a focus of this, but I don't want to dictate that. I really believe that's got to come from the collective voice.
Speaking of Fire Station 6, we got a clip here of you back on June 12th.
But what I've heard from community more on some other properties that people really want turned back to the community. And so I think we have to have all those conversations with, Fire Station 6, the Central Area Senior Center. Those are places that need to be rooted in and returned to community.
So, Mayor Durkan, where exactly are you in this process of returning to community? As you know, Fire Station 6 it's been 6-7 years, in this process. So, I mean, what process have you actually made, or your office or the city has made, to keep that promise, the discussion that you had right there on June 12th?
I think we're done. We sent down to council legislation to return both of those properties. Central Area Senior Center will be ownership and a deed, and Fire Station 6, and working with Africatown and others, there's a 99-year lease together with support for other improvements. So we have moved forward on that really quickly, because we think that if we can't show progress on every front, then we haven't done what we need to do. And so the $100 million is a significant, important piece of this, but it also means we have got to continue with the other things that we've promised. The return of the properties like Bird Bar, Fire Station 6, Central Area Senior Center, to work with Africatown when we finally get past this pandemic and make sure that, Earl's and Brown Girl Cooks is in there and supported, to really think about all of those cultural pieces, and the city has got to show up to play its part.
Ma'am, how do we judge success for this? What are the success matrix? I mean, you talked about, generations from now, we look back. I mean, it very well might be, that we don't want to repeat this. And you hear me say this all the time, that whatever these issues are in our city, that they need to be addressed. So my son or my grandson, whenever that might be, no hurry, they're not having these same conversations. So what is success of your program, or what your initiative here looks like? How are you gauging that? What are the metrics that, because you're putting up the money, and I'm sure that you have to have some metrics that are associated with the money, because it's coming out of the general fund.
So I think that's a great question. We all, if you close your eyes, everybody knows what a safe and healthy community feels like. And we've got to, I think success means that every kid growing up in Seattle actually does have the same opportunities and can live in a community that is safe for them. And safety, we frame so much of this debate around policing, which is right, because policing in Seattle and across America has to change. But true community safety really derives from so many other things. It's access to affordable housing, it's access to food, it's the cultural pieces, the small businesses, the schools. And so these metrics together have to be holistic. And I think that, again, I have been privileged to have access to those and have that kind of communities in my life. And I don't believe, again, that it should be any mayor or any city council member that necessarily dictates what success looks like. That's why this $100 million has to be part of the collective voice and self-determination, because for too long, we have used our procedures, our systems, which were designed, literally legally designed, to hold people back and discriminate. And we've got to stop that cycle.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Mayor Durkan. When you talk about the systems were designed to hold people back, very interesting. Last year, the state legislature unanimously passed House Bill 1918, signed by Governor Jay Inslee, which says just that the African-American community in the Central District was systemically targeted through laws and policies of what's led right there. And House Bill 1918, passing both houses unanimously, even means that a lawmaker in Okanagan County, in Franklin County, in Spokane, the whole state unanimously sees systemically what happened there in the Central District. And I bring that up, Mayor Durkan, because I tell people all the time that it's not that this system is broken, ma'am. It's that this system doesn't work for us. This system is very efficient. Like you just said, when you're on the inside of the system, it works well. The problem that we face here, ma'am, is not only are we not in the system, but also we get targeted by the system. Man, what is it that you are going to do beyond this $100 million, the commitment that you're making? What is your larger commitment to ensure that this system finally works for Black people in this city?
So I think the first thing that I and everyone have to do is acknowledge and admit that exactly what you said is true. It's not that the system didn't work. It's that it worked exactly like it was designed. It was designed to benefit certain people and exclude certain people. And it was done for generations. And so we have to look at ways, look at our contracting. When Initiative 200 passed, which I worked really hard against, it changed and turned upside down the access that Black contractors had to contracts. And you saw statistically what happened to so many middle American jobs in the Black community in Seattle from that. So we're looking at ways, because we now have things like the bill that passed in Olympia, we have proof of the systemic disparities, and that gives us the ability to correct them. And so we're working hard to say, how do we look at our own contracting to make up for that? And we used to call it affirmative action, but that sounds like it's a favor. This isn't a favor. This is actually having an equitable playing field. And it's something that we have a duty to do, an obligation to do. And we have just, for too many generations, America has not only failed to promise, it has put systems in place that have made sure that promise can't come true.
All right, Mayor Durkan, just a few more questions. I know we're getting short on time here, but before we move on from the budget, I would like you to give you one more opportunity here to explain exactly what's going to happen around this $100 million. If you could explain it one more time to our viewers so we're all on the same page moving forward.
That's great. And then I want to come right back to one other thing we could at the end about revenues and progressive revenues and how that's designed to also build inequities into the system. So this $100 million is going to be in a community equitable account, if you will. We will kick off a task force that will have a range of people from BIPOC communities to look at basically 4 areas. From the conversations I've had with people, I think this is initial areas people look at, but the task force and community may decide to look at others. It's building opportunity in an inclusive economy. And we've talked about that here this morning, about how that has not been the case. There's community wealth building and cultural spaces. And that relates to everything from access to loans, to properties, to how do we make sure that there is cultural spaces in the city of Seattle that reflect that. There's community wellness. We have a Dessa Brown clinic and we have clinics in our schools, but if you look across access to healthcare, it is again a place where the Black community and other communities of color have been left behind, and by every wellness indicator behind. And then looking in those categories, the last one is, the climate and environmental justice and the Green New Deal. You look at those communities again, access to healthy foods, green space, parks, the disproportionate pollution and toxic waste in communities of color, even here in Seattle. So looking across those, thinking what outcomes does community want, and how do we design the programs to do that? And so this task force will itself be the ones to engage and prioritize. I see it probably will work in phases. The first phase would be, how do we allocate and prioritize ourselves so we can get outcomes, concrete outcomes? And then how do we as a city and through others give the support and research and data they need to design how that looks? And then the final stage would be to come back, because you have to finally have an ordinance that appropriates the money and puts the programs in place, because it is public money, but really using that process to design where are those priorities going to be, what outcomes do we want? In order for it to work, Omari, it really can't be a one-time deal. We as a city have got to commit to this over time. And I'm going to be looking for dedicated funding of this magnitude over the 10 years, because otherwise you won't move the needle. That doesn't come close to where people have been underfunded for generations, but it is, I think, can start making a difference. So I'm looking for progressive revenue. I believe we need a city income tax, and if we did, we could dedicate part of that to this over a period of years. If we can't do that, I want to work with the task force and others to say, do we need, for example, an equity levy, like we did with the Families and Ed levy, where we know there's dedicated funding over a 7-year period that will ensure that we're using money for preschool and childcare and free education in college. So it's a combination of both. How does community decide how to do this? But then how do I and others work to make sure that this can continue over a period of years?
Ma'am, when's the task force supposed to come together or meet or be selected?
I think we hope to have that next week.
Next week. Okay. Did you have another question on budget, Trina, or we move on to the next one?
No, you can move on. Thank you.
All right. So Mayor, of course, the other big news, well, it's a lot of big news this week in Seattle, to be honest with you. I think you could agree on that. But of course, the big news earlier this week was the city council override of your veto of their budget. And, you know, I think most people have been following along. We've done a lot of shows. We like to educate the public. But in that override, one of the big things that's come out now and what the public is saying is of that defund movement of King County Equity Now and Decrim and everything else is what they're saying is free the funds. Hold on, I got a clip right here from Sean Glaze.
I mean, I think one thing that's really important for people to recognize is that it is now up to the mayor to release those funds. So City Council has spoken very clearly and articulated that this is what needs to happen. This money needs to go out to community. It needs to happen now in 2020. And it's up to the mayor to actually move and act to get those funds into community hands. And so if that money doesn't go into community hands, it is because our mayor has chosen not to act swiftly enough to get them there.
All right, Mayor Durkan, you're talking directly to the Black community and probably the Seattle as a whole. What is your opinion on this free the funds? Are you going to spend this money that's in that budget or what?
We're going to do everything we can to get it out the door. And my issue was not with the funds and how they were going to be used. It was the way the debt, the $14 million in debt, which would decrease funding for next year. And also council admitted to me, they weren't sure they could get the money out the door because under the process, once it's appropriated, then we have to, under law, unless under $50,000, put an RFQ, execute a contract. I'm meeting with my budget team today to say how quickly we can get this out. We want to get it into community and make sure that those funds are available. Whether logistically in this process, you know, council, almost all of them admitted to me, they knew it was going to be almost impossible to get out the door, but we're going to try. We want these funds in the hands as council directed.
So Mayor Durkan, you're not obstructing you want to see these funds get out as fast as they can in the proper way, of course, as fast as they can per the budget that was passed.
Absolutely.
All right.
I have one question about that too, because I know that the process right now, because it's public funding, it really has to go through the RFP process. But I'm wondering if there's a way to also work with your team on understanding how to create a new process around that, because we do understand that the RFP process in general and historically has led to many, many boundaries, many, many roadblocks, and those walls that Omari was just talking about earlier was certain, you know, really with within the Black community in terms of participation. So how are those kind of barriers to entry going to be reduced in this process? And then maybe further on, longer down the line, really looking at, well, how do we do things differently without needing this entire RFP process?
So I think those are great questions. It's going to be hard for us to change the city laws related to RFPs, but there are too many obstacles and barriers for communities. And it goes back to what we said before. You know, just the forms themselves, or what you need is the backdrop, or the 2-year performance, or how are you going to do it, the business plan. So we're going to look at ways. One of the things that our budget team and the Department of Neighborhoods, Office of Economic Development are looking at right now is what tools do we have to get this money out the door to the places that will make a difference as quickly as we can. But I think your question is the better one, is how do we revamp how we do that business? And so, you know, consistent as the community is working on this $100 million, we want to engage with community to say, show us what those barriers have been so that we hear it firsthand and have the task force so we can improve the system in every place. Because if, you know, it is again part of the systemic barriers that have really functioned to build inequity. And so we have got to be honest about that, look at it. Obviously, we have to have certain accountabilities for tax dollars, but you can have accountability and still make it that people have the ability to get the resources they need to make the difference that we need in community.
Right. Ma'am, There's, as you know, you're under recall. The state Supreme Court is supposed to make a ruling here probably in October. And I sat down with the team from Recall Durkan, and what they were saying is that you haven't protected the citizens and that there's a lack of confidence. I want to play this for you here and give you an opportunity to respond.
You're under no risk as mayor as long as you follow the rules, as long as you protect your people, as long as you uphold your duty as mayor. You can't be recalled. And then it just goes to a vote. If people still believe in you as a mayor, it's just a vote.
Ma'am, you know, I mean, clearly you have your supporters in this city, but this is also a very serious movement that's going on over there. There was a lot of recall things early on in the protest. They all fell through the cracks. This is the one that's remained. It's now there at the Supreme Court. There is a certain percentage, I can't give you the number, a certain percentage of citizens here in this city who have lost confidence in your leadership. What is it that you have to say to those citizens that are out there that might be supporters of Recall Durkan or people that are supporting this recall? How do you regain their confidence? I mean, this is a bigger, like I said, a big question, even bigger than our community, the Black community. This is a question really for the whole citywide, is how do you regain the confidence of the citizens here?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I want to say a few things. First is, look, we're in really unprecedented times, and our city has been dealing with global pandemic and economic crisis, civil rights uprising, and we've been dealing with challenges that no city's ever had to deal with before. And there's many people who agree with the way that I've conducted the city through this time, and there's a lot of people that don't. A lot of the people who disagree with me have never agreed with me and have never supported me. For the other ones, I know I've got to win trust. And so on the recall itself, I will say is, I'm not going to focus on what the Supreme Court does or doesn't do. My job is the same. My job is to move the city forward. And right now, in this moment of time, in this budget, my biggest obligation is to make sure not that we just continue to deal with the pandemic and its impacts, which there are. We continue to deliver city services, but that we actually show that we heard the voices marching in the street, that at this moment in time, we have an obligation to actually address and admit systemic racism in our city and to use my power as a mayor to make a difference. That's what I hope to be able to do with this investment of $100 million. It's what I do every day since I've been coming in. You know, we've made historic contributions, for example, $1.5 billion in affordable housing, most of it going to communities of color. The Equitable Development Initiative that has been seeing amazing programs that the community developed for years that we were able to help fund, whether it was Africa Town or the Filipino Community Center. But at the end of the day, the recall will proceed how it proceeds. I will note this, and you know this, Omari, from seeing it. You know, their most recent thing that they filed said that really what I did wrong was that I didn't fire or dismiss Chief Best or overrule her and take over the police department. I had and continue to have confidence in her and the chief. I don't think that was my role to do at that time.
All right, ma'am. I know that we're over time. I appreciate you staying on with us. You know, I mean, I was going to bring this up anyway, but considering the events of last night with Bobby and things like that, I mean, I could talk to you about protests for hours, and I hope that we get an opportunity to talk again specifically on that. But, you know, people are still in the streets. People, there's still protests that are going on literally, you know, morning and afternoon, evening, sometimes late evening, night shift. And we see them out there, and sometimes they're totally peaceful and sometimes they're not. Man, protesters are still out there in the streets 100 some odd days later. You know, what is it that you're wanting to say to the protesters, especially about these demands that are out there and everything else? Because the protesters aren't going anywhere. And I hear you with this $100 million, and I know you're going to explain it more to everybody, and you're going to use your communication channels, and that might take a few people off the streets. Like, oh, okay, man, the mayor, she's put this $100 million. But man, what is it that you think it's going to take? Is it the meeting of demands? Is it people seeing swift change? What's it going to take to get people off the streets protesting?
So I think in the long term, it will take justice in the systems. And protesters will stay in the streets and they will continue to protest and raise their voice. They'll continue to challenge people not in the streets, but through the political system. You see a record number of young people and people of color running for offices and challenging what would be deemed establishment people. And so I think that you will continue to see that until we see significant shifts in equity, not just here in Seattle, but across the nation. We need to show that policing can change. We need to show that we can invest in healthcare, affordable housing, and educational opportunities and economic opportunities. And until those things actually are concrete in people's lives, I don't think that you will see a shift in people's view that there needs to be change.
And are you still moving forward now that you have a new chief, Chief Diaz? Is the city still moving forward with Chief Best's plan around reimagination of the Seattle Police Department?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that's going to be a separate process of engagement with people, because we know that, again, there's things we know that work, Amari. And we also know that if you put 5 cops at one table and 5 community members at another table and said, let's name 3 things we don't want cops to do anymore, those lists wouldn't be that dissimilar. We had Seattle Police Department responded to almost 17,000 crisis calls last year. Every one of those crisis calls reflects a place broken in the systems upstream that we as a society have ignored. Those shouldn't be things that are addressed by police or the criminal legal system. We've got to go upstream on those things and take some of those jobs off the cops' plate and really build community resources so that you can have someone who knows a family. So the next time that there's a dispute between father and son or mother and son or husband and wife or partners, someone maybe connected with that family can help intercede and de-escalate instead of police roll into the door. So we've got to both reimagine how we do policing, but we also have to have programs in place 24/7 that if you dial 911, you get the help you need. And then upstream, if you invest, $1 billion over 10 years, hopefully you start building a more healthy and resilient community. And in healthy and resilient communities, people don't have to dial 911 as often.
Ma'am, are you working with the Seattle Police Department in regards to their crowd control policies and tactics? Meaning that, and on scrolling on Twitter, I wasn't able to get the screenshot up here. There's business owners up there on Capitol Hill who said that they got hit with blast balls, or their business got damaged, or they've got, this OC gas that's coming to their home and everything else, let alone the interaction between the protesters and the police. I think one of the findings was that the Seattle Police Department could actually do much more as far as their crowd control management, especially when the protest is against the police. I'm wondering what kind of a hands-on role are you taking, as to what's going on here in Seattle with this protest and the intensity level and the crowd control management of the police and all the other, basically innocent people who are up there, especially in the Capitol Hill area, who are impacted by these blast balls, by the OC spray, by smoke, by some of everything else.
So I talk to Chief Diaz regularly. I've also talked to the Office Inspector General, OPA, the federal monitor, city council members. Look, we're going to have to, there is no question that the crowd control policies and techniques for the Seattle Police Department over the summer and recently have not been effective. And in fact, I think that they in many ways have escalated tensions. I think we have to adapt new ways. Some of the protests, particularly the direct action, are different than other protests that they've dealt with. We've seen a number of police officers who've been injured as well, including night before last with one hit with a baseball bat in his head. So we've got to have policies in place. I hope to be able to, that there will be, Judge Robart gets the final say. Because of the consent decree, he has made very clear that any policies and training he is going to have to approve. And so I think we need to reimagine what that looks like and actually talk to people who've been in this protest, do some things that we know have to be done. And in the meantime, make sure that the Office's Inspector General is empowered to look systemically. They're still in the middle of their Sentinel review to see over the summer particularly when we had that decline, what we have to do better. And OPA is reviewing each of the individual complaints against officers. If we want to have strong oversight, we've got to not just resource that oversight, we've got to try to let it work, but also, of course, improve it if it needs to be improved. So I think it's going to be, one, listening to OPA, making sure that if police officers have violated policy, including policies, if there's actions against the media or against medics or against legal observers, that falls in one category under Judge Jones's order, and against what's right. So these have been super dynamic. From being there yourselves many, many nights, that the mood can shift in a minute, and that it is the direct action protesters are very different than some of the other protests that we've seen in the city. And what's happening in Portland, I think, is at the extreme end of that in terms of some of what's happening there. So we got to do better. I talked to Chief Diaz about it. We're talking as a system. But again, that's eventually Judge Robart's going to have the final say, and we're going to have a lot of input to see how we do that better. In the meantime, Chief Diaz, as Chief Best did, is trying to change their tactics night to night to kind of de-escalate some of those events. It hasn't been successful, but there's also been, there's been some more aggressive behavior against the police. We've seen, fires and things like that. So we've got to make sure too that if people are in a crowd, those who are there peacefully can enjoy the right to protest, but those that aren't, that there's some way to take action without jeopardizing the people there that are exercising their First Amendment rights.
Right, and we also saw a clip. We didn't film it, but a clip of a police officer being hit in the head with a baseball bat, and then we also saw a clip of a Seattle police officer rolling over the head of a protester down there. And so, as you can see, this is a spiral here as far as what's coming out of these protests on Capitol Hill. And I just want to reaffirm, you said it here on the top of the show, but I just want to reaffirm that you support the media and journalists' right to be out there and to cover the protests, not to obstruct in any way, but to cover the protests that are occurring right here in Seattle.
It's not only a right, Omari, it's a necessity. Look, we have to, people say it sounds trite, that journalism has never been more important. But I believe that's true. And I believe in these protests, it has actually been reporters like yourselves and media that isn't necessarily your traditional media that has both provided people with what's happening, but it provides accountability in itself. And so I think that, we not only have an obligation to do it, it's the right thing to do. Now, I think too, that if there's someone who's right on the front lines, we've got to have ways that we make sure we can identify the press, that we can get them off to a side if the line starts to move. And we need to have better communication with all of the people who are protesting, let alone the media and the legal observers. So it's part of the difficulty of you seeing some people who are press in the sense that they're there streaming all the time, but who don't necessarily wear the press badge or identify themselves as press. And so I think we need better input from folks like you to say, okay, how does Seattle Police Department do better to make sure that they can quickly identify the press before they take actions?
All right, Mayor Durkan, like I said, I would really look forward to another opportunity to go more in depth about Seattle protests as somebody who's been on there since day one. And a few other people. I know that the purpose of this interview today was primarily around the budget. And so I wanted to respect that. I do thank you for taking the additional questions here. And I will say this before we get out of here. I always talk about my big three. You did touch on one of them, a big three, big O's big three for the CD. There's more than three, but these are mine, is the economic income gap, home ownership, which leads to generational wealth, community preservation, and the other is the education gap. These are three very big things right now that are plaguing our community, and it's bottoming out in our community. You've made a commitment. You talk about $100 million a year. You want to put it out there for the next 10 years. But I would just say this, is that me as Omari, as at Converge Media, is that we're watching the process like a hawk, like I think you'd want us to do. we're watching this process because we need to move the needle on those big three. Other ones as well. But you know what? If black people can't make more than 40, a household can't make more than 42,500 a year, black people are going to disappear from this city. If home ownership continues to decline, that means that every generation we press reset. Other communities, they're able to pass on that generational wealth. Here's a house. We can take out a mortgage. We can do this and that. In our community, we're pressing reset. And I'll be honest with you, Mayor Durkan, I'm sure you can agree that at the education gap between black and white students, of where it is right now in Seattle, if that is not addressed, then we can have no expectation for black children to graduate from high school and get these high paying jobs that we'll see 15 years from now, they come back and they're in the high paying structure. So I hope that you and your administration, although this $100 million is great, you know what I'm saying, and we'll see, and we're going to follow that. I hope that your administration is committed to not only these big three, but the others that are out there that are required for our community.
Absolutely. And I will say that right before I talked to you, I swore in Dwayne Chappelle for a second term as head of the Department of Education and Early Learning. And he and I have had so many conversations about the same thing. It's why the Seattle Promise, the 2 years free college, and then getting kids ready so they actually can graduate was so important to me, because we will never get over that economic gap without it. I mean, if you look at where we are today, the difference between the innovation economy and the service sector has never been greater. The disparities have never been greater. And you look at who's in those two sectors, and that tells you so much about what we need to know. And one thing I'd ask your help on is, I'm really concerned that if we don't do better as a city, and it's the Seattle Public Schools, I know they're struggling, but you look at who didn't even sign on for their classes last spring when we went onto online. And kids of color, particularly black males, got lost. That's one reason why we just dedicated more of our levy dollars to really focus on how do we make sure not only they have connections to the internet, but how do we get mentorship and working with those youth to keep them online, keep them in school, get them so they graduate. Because this year of online learning could set us back so far. And Seattle's got its levy dollars, but it's really the Seattle Public Schools. It's going to have that accountability so that whether it's quarter to quarter, they should have a by name list so teachers know exactly what's happening with their students and their families, have a way that they get the food they're not getting because they're not in school, that the parents have access to childcare, and that the kids actually have a way to stay in and keep learning. Because this year alone on that could set us back so much.
I'll tell you this, Mayor Durkan, it's the same thing that I've told School Board Director Hersey, DeWolf, Hampson, is that as far as our students in Seattle Public Schools, whatever Converge Media can do to be able to communicate and message to parents and to students, whatever role that we can play, we're going to play it. I mean, it's a role we've been playing anyway, and I mean, I'm glad to hear you bring this up, and I'm glad that you're making it a priority. And yeah, let's make something happen out there, because, if we continue to sit idly by, we'll see the constant decline and possible disappearance of this amazing legacy Black community here in Seattle.
Yeah.
And I will say too, Mayor Durkan, I appreciated you talking about mentorship, because I think that what you're describing is what we talk about all the time at community, that, community people do know how to do things. And with the right resources and the right amount of capital, they will have the ability to really start infecting their communities with positivity, and connecting young folks to mentors is one of those ways that we can do that. And I think that highlighting that is super important, and it's key that community groups, community organizations, and leaders are really resourced enough to be able to step in and do that work and be guided in the right ways. So it's definitely about collaboration at this point.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. And I mean, I'll leave you with two things, Omar and Triana, is one, there's a really bright star that hasn't gotten much attention you should look into, is that Technology Access Foundation, which really has the secret sauce for taking kids of color and getting them in tech, is starting in Washington Middle School this year. And they're going to build that program. And I think it is going to really change what happens in that school and for kids of color. And Trish, who runs that program, I'm sure you know her. She is amazing. So I've got a lot of hope that we can use that as a model throughout the Seattle Public Schools. And I also just want to say, Converge Media, thank you. And thank you, Africatown. We're better because of you. I mean, independent media plus just the demand and follow through on investments in community and community place. That's what's going to actually turn the dial in Seattle.
Thank you, Mayor Durkan. And we'll be following up. You know how we do. So
yeah, I know. And I will come back and we can talk protests too.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I mean, your staff, they get so many emails from me. So, I mean, again, I'll say this. We put out a call yesterday. You answered the call. So thank you, Mayor Durkan, and we'll be talking to you soon.
All right. You all take care now. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate everybody that follows us, donates to us, supports us. We have a staff here that works really, really, really hard. A lot of volunteers that come through. We're trying to make some really, really good stuff for you guys. And we're a growing company. And, please, even a handshake coming up in public is worth something to me. We get a lot of love from you guys, and I just want to reciprocate that love to you guys and say I appreciate it. It really fills my heart with joy when people come up and recognize me for some of the work that I've done, and it makes me really proud. And I get a lot of my friends and family tell me about how proud they are, and that's the thing about it is we've been working hard at doing this for a long time, and we want to be able to bring other people into our family that are to continue to do good stuff. And so, all the help we get from the public, we appreciate and keep watching. And we hope to make you guys proud, and I'm open to any suggestions for some stuff you guys like to see. I'm here.
Bobby Stills right there. She recorded that a few weeks ago saying thank you to all of our supporters out there, people who continue to support Converge Media. Again, Bobby Stills arrested last night on Capitol Hill, arrested for failure to disperse and obstruction, I guess obstruction of justice. It says obstruction. Bobby got out early this morning. He's resting right now, so he is out. A lot of people have been checking in on Twitter. I mean, that Twitter, it was crazy last night. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to tell our public, our supporters, the general public, everything, man. I've never felt so much like, man, it was so many people that were just hitting us like, yo, man, what's up with Bobby? I just saw Bobby, this and that, everything else. And it was a bit overwhelming. There's quite a few people I didn't get back to, but I just wanted to tell everybody, you know what I'm saying? Thank you for your continued support, Converge Media. And, the protest isn't something that we went looking for. We've been out here for years. And I mean, the protest for us just started as a regular story, and I covered May Day 2016. So it's like, oh, okay, well, here's the protest. And then they'll probably just move on and everything else. And so, for us, it's also been sustained coverage for the most part, on something that we initially thought that, man, it was going to be a few days. This is months and months in of coverage. And man, we're just out here doing the best that we can. And, like I said, I felt some kind of way last night because we're always out together. And last night was the night that, we weren't out there all together. And, I feel accountable. I feel responsible for everybody. And so I'm just glad this guy's out. We're going to pick it up from there.
Absolutely, man. And I know Bobby's so resilient. You know what I mean? I know that, he probably kept his spirits high, knowing that, he was on the side of right. I mean, ultimately being out there and really just trying to capture the story for the audience so people understand, the characteristics and dynamics that happen is super important. As Mayor Durkan just said, to learn from the journalists that are out there on the ground. And it's not happening in major media. It needs the voices of folks like yourselves, Bobby, Eric Calligraphy, Jake Gravbrat, being on the ground, really showcasing what's happening.
Right. And, it's the history in our community and through the civil rights struggle and everything else. It's been media, sometimes our community media, and sometimes the bigger lens of national media that's been able to tell the stories. And a lot of times, those guys are in harm's way. Those reporters were in harm's way on the Pettus Bridge when John Lewis tried to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge and was met by the Alabama State Police. Those journalists there were also in danger as well. Anyways, Trey, we got a few programming notes here, and actually we got to cut this show in a minute. Your Chats with Trey is 2:00 today. Tell us who's on Chats with Trey.
Yeah, Aksum Art. Stephanie Morales of Aksum Art is going to be featured on Chats with Trey today at 2 p.m. As you say, she has some amazing collections inspired by this movement, inspired by what she saw in the CHOP and her own lived experience. So I get into it with Stephanie Morales of Aksum Art on Chats with Trey today at 2 p.m.
Okay, and people might remember Stephanie, right? She was on the morning show a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. She was just there showcasing some of her work, and they know our set right now. Our new set has the one painting. Yeah, it's one painting of hers that's phenomenal.
The big painting, the painting of the woman. That's her painting, right?
Yeah, that's Stephanie. Yeah.
Everybody knows her work. Man, what can I say? But what a week, Started off with City Council. On Monday, they chose to make the vote. On Tuesday, they voted to override the veto. Then, the Breonna Taylor indictment decision, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot to talk about that on Monday. Protest, Sky Bobby,
What a week, man. A week of rides.
Now, I think for us, with the mayor, keeping it on the mayor with this $100 million, people say community. Well, community needs to really, if you're not awake right now in our community, wake up. You know what I'm saying? Wake up, be engaged, be whatever, because a lot of time, I give this advice for our city all the time. We as the citizen stakeholders need to stop outsourcing leadership and stop outsourcing accountability. I'm gonna be honest with you. In our community, us Black people, in this diminishing number that we have, wake up, get involved in this process. Wake up. Now's your time. You know what I'm saying? And it's like people, and this is why I play so many shows. People always ask me why I'm doing these analysis and everything else, because what I do see, Trey, is an awakening. People who I never thought years ago would be interested in how city council works. How is a bill passed? What does this federal lawsuit mean? They log in now and they're wanting to know these things. So I see that our community is really like, they have an appetite for the process. So that also means mayor's office, city council, community organizations. There's a whole bunch of people in our community right now that never asked you a question, that never held you accountable, that never questioned your leadership, that they're coming right now. And, people should want to welcome that with open arms. There's a whole group of people in our community that are waking up and being completely involved in the process. We just need more of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I always say there's somewhere that you can bring your brilliance. Don't forget about that, because right now this is the building of this movement. And there is a real swell here in Seattle. There's an opportunity for you to bring your brilliance in and plug in. And ultimately, if you feel like, well, I don't really know, or this or that, you still have a voice. You have an opinion. You have some strong thought about how you want your city to grow and thrive and how you want your future generations to have access to opportunity. So think about it in that regard and bring your brain, bring your ideas, your opinions, your voice to this movement. Absolutely, yo.
Yeah, and one thing that I want to be very clear with everybody, is that this $100 million that Mayor Durkan is talking about, man, it's fine. It's money. You know what I'm saying? Who doesn't need money, especially at this time? But man, without the system working for you or with you, it's just money. And nothing comes out of that. We see, look how much money they've thrown at homelessness. Look how much money it's whatever. So a caveat of this, why people need to wake up, is you even heard the mayor say it herself. You know what I'm saying? This system was built. It works fine. It's just been built for certain people. So we as a community, we have to make sure, like, man, 100 million is going to come and go. But if the system works against us, then, man, that $100 million a year means nothing. We need the system to work for us. This system that they have designed is amazingly efficient in delivering any result that they want. And man, for once the system has to work with us.
Yeah, period. And this is why we need all of the voices. We need all of the energy. We need all of the participation right now, because it's going to take everybody involved to dismantle the system. If some of us are sticking in it, got our toes in it, thinking that this is the way to go, that's unfortunate, because they're going to rock with you. But you have to understand that globally now, there's a real swell and movement for folks to say this system is working the way it was designed, which means it's working against me. And I'm not for that. I'm not for anything being against me anymore or against my future generations. That's what we're talking about right now. Whether you're black, brown, white, indifferent, whatever, at the end of the day, you don't want a system that is held against particular people. Even if you're a white person, you don't want your kids to be raised in a system that gives you privilege and that gives you a certain status that other people can't get. Now is the time to awaken ourselves. And I agree with you. Oh, bring yourselves to this movement.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is the system should just give everybody privilege.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Like, man, if I was privileged, I wouldn't want to not be privileged. I just want everybody else to be privileged.
There we go.
I mean, this is what the whole point that I'm making is the mayor is going to come out. I mean, she talked about it some today. I'm sure there'll be a big formal presser downtown and everything else. The mayor is going to make a formal announcement, this $100 million, which could lead to $1 billion and everything else. People in the black community, when you hear that, don't just go back to sleep. Oh, well, the mayor's putting up some money. We're going to this is now the time when you got to roll up your sleeves. Also, we want to challenge everybody there. So now the mayor's echoing something we've been saying right here is that, man, we need our parents out there more engaged with these young people. Seattle Public Schools, man, our kids were in a crisis before COVID. And now with the online learning and everything else, and for people that are out there who are in this education ecosystem, wherever you're out there, if there's anything Converge can do, these young people are the most important thing. And Trayana, I don't stop for a lot, but we always stop for these young people. I got time. Converge has time for these young people in our community. We got time for these young people. I will make the time for young people in our community. Whatever Converge can do to be able to get these students, these young black students out there who are not engaging with Zoom, that are not logging on, whatever it is, man. Somebody, you need me to come to your house, show your kids how to do whatever, man. I'm gonna make house calls. I'm gonna do, man, whatever it is that we need to do. We're gonna put our money where our mouth is, because this is our future. That is the real investment, is our kids. And if our kids continue to fail out of Seattle Public Schools, my friends, then we have no future.
Yeah, period, point blank, Omari, you are so right. And it does require that everybody bring their brilliance. Not only that, but that we really do this collectively. As you just said, it doesn't matter. I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that we have a lot of working parents, right? You got full-time jobs, so you can't really be there for your kids to log on. Utilize some of these community resources. Don't have it all on your own back. Understand that, look, there are opportunities for your children to be learning in a village style. Let's bring back the village style mentality. Let's not be like, hey, don't discipline my kid because I know what's best for my kid. We need to change our ideology around parenting and around the way that we deal with one another in community. And this is the way that we can start. I'm loving the new ideas that are really coming around, because bringing in resources for people means that everybody's not scrambling to live. We want to help you too, mom and dad that go to work and your kid has to do the Zoom on their own, or maybe they're not logging in. We want to help you too have a better life. And this is what equity is all about. It's about bringing up everybody so that what you just said, everybody can live in the privilege that white people have endured since the beginning of this country.
I'll be honest with you, Trayana. I've been saying it for a while, ever since COVID started. In every crisis, there's an opportunity. Yeah. Us here, the black community in Seattle, definitely we're in crisis. We've been in crisis. It's time for us to start finding and maximizing the opportunities.
There we go. Oh, I agree wholeheartedly.
I'm standing up over here, Trey.
Hey, I'm standing, brother. You got me on my standing desk today.
All right. Chats with Trey, 2:00 today. Hopefully we won't be going live this weekend, but you just never know. In that case, you'll see a live alert. But if not, back Monday at 11 a.m. And until then, peace.
Peace.
Lift every voice and sing till earth in heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise as the